For Liz Truss, the past month has been complete mayhem as her premiership has started off horribly and may finish similarly. In order to clarify the situation for those of you who are not paying close attention, let's also provide a timeline of how we arrived at this point. The Bank of England was forced into a desperate intervention due to the UK's borrowing costs, which had previously been among the lowest in the G7. Meanwhile, the UK is prone to a full-blown financial crisis, which raises concerns. Let's dig in to find out how it ended up like this. The UK's economy, which had been stable and had low growth under Truss, has supposedly collapsed. This story will begin with the Conservative leadership election to succeed Boris Johnson, which got underway in the middle of July. Conservative MPs had reduced the number of potential candidates to only 2 by the middle of July. Then, Chancellor Rishi Sunak, an established fiscal conservative who essentially represented the party's moderate wing, and the former Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, a self-described libertarian who'd gained notoriety among Tory members by adopting outlandishly protectionist stances on all matters pertaining to Brexit. It's important to note that, at this time, neither the Conservative MPs nor the general public thought much of Truss. Regarding the in-secretary, not many MPs supported her in the leadership runoff rounds of the election, and her popularity rating with the general public remained stable at roughly 10% of the negative range. For instance, Truss received just 103 votes in the decisive round, or just over 30% of all MPs. It's also important to note that even that figure probably exaggerates her actual popularity within the parliamentary party, as some of the 137 MPs who voted for her did so in anticipation of her likely victory in the membership ballot. And as a result, the majority of her supporters were hoping to work for her government in exchange for their support by voting for her. Truss was, however, quite popular among the Conservative membership, topping Conservative home polls frequently and holding an approval rate of over 50%, despite not being especially popular with MPs or the wider public. Sunak's national insurance hike and apparent betrayal of Boris Johnson made him popular with Conservative members at first, but he soon lost their support. However, the main focus of the last rounds of this campaign between Monarch and Truss was the tax issue. While Sunak charged her with financial irresponsibility and said that her actions would worsen inflation and drive up interest rates and mortgage expenses, Truss claimed that she had slashed taxes across the board. Watching what was really stated throughout the campaign is also important because, well, looking back on it now, that seems remarkably predictive. The new Prime Minister and government's top economic objective is to control inflation because we cannot allow it to worsen. Everyone becomes poorer as a result of inflation, which also consumes your money. It lowers your level of living and results in rising interest rates for those of you who have mortgages. Therefore, we don't believe that embarking on an impulsive frenzy of borrowing and increasing debt at this time would be responsible. That will only prolong the problem and make inflation worse. The answer is far too obvious. We have inflation because we haven't been strict enough with the money supply in our monetary policy. But it's incorrect, and we must be honest. Interest rates are mortgage nightmares. They were Liz, but using borrowed money to combat inflation is not a strategy. Truss ultimately won the election with 57% of the vote in the final round thanks to her tax-cutting policy platform and her already existing popularity among Conservative Party members. As a result, she was appointed Prime Minister on September 6. However, the Queen's passing 2 days later caused a significant delay in her policy agenda. Parliament reconvened on Thursday, September 20th, after the designated time of mourning. However, Truss was distracted on those by the annual UN Assembly that was taking place in New York. On Friday, 21st, Truss returned to London just in time to witness Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor, give the much-awaited mini-budget. Numerous previously announced tax savings were included in this mini-budget. But there was also a ton of unexpected tax cuts. The total cost of these schemes was estimated to be $44.5 billion for the Treasury. In addition, Truss resisted incorporating the study of the Office of Budgetary Duties into her plans and made no promises to reduce spending in order to pay for them. As a result, the markets reacted negatively to these underfunded, unannounced, and unchecked tax cuts. The pound also fell to a 37-year low of $1.90 against the dollar by 21 September. To make things worse, the borrowing rates also increased, with the yield on 10-year bonds increasing from 3% to 8%. Redfield-Wilton polling discovered that Labour Party still led the Conservatives by 10 points in response to this. Despite having a 4% approval rating, Truss was still a few points ahead of Starmer in the voting for Best Prime Minister. Then trade stopped over the weekend, which meant that neither the pound nor the gilt market saw any more change. However, the relaxation of restrictions on bankers' bonuses and a reduction of the top tax rate sparked popular anger because they appeared to favor the richest members of society disproportionately. As a result of the deteriorating public mood, Labour's lead increased to 13 points, and Starmer established a 4-point lead over Truss in the Best Prime Minister category. On Monday, June 27th, when the markets reopened, the pound hit a new low of $1.04. Events in 10-year gilt markets increased much more, reaching 4.3%. Pension funds were caught in a gilt-selling doom cycle on the 29th, which contributed to gilt markets reaching a new high of 4.5%. Finally, the Bank of England had to step in with a $6.55 billion emergency gilt buying program. However, despite the little reprieve that this gave, Truss continued to stick to her numerous budgetary plans. And on the next day, following a string of appalling local radio appearances, the gilt market began to rise once more. Hugo of Poland gave Labour a 33-point advantage over the Conservatives by Friday, which is undoubtedly bad for Truss. Redfield and Wilton polling did, however, appear a little better in her eyes. Even though Labour only held a 17% advantage in that polling, Truss still lagged Starmer as the best PM by 7 points and had a negative 14 approval rating. Truss next attended the Conservative Party conference on Sunday, October 2nd, which is often a rather simple event for new party leaders. But the conference was a mess, which is unfortunate for Truss. Many MPs, most notably Michael Gove, criticized her for changing the top tax rate in the beginning. On Monday, she made a U-turn and reintroduced the top rate of 45%, alleging that it had turned into a distraction. However, while representing only roughly £2 billion of the £45 billion in tax cuts, this was unable to calm the markets, in large part because of this. Obviously, the optics are poor in this case, and by the time the conference was over, Wilton had a lead of 28 points. Truss is 20 points behind Starmer as the best prime minister, while Starmer has the lowest ever standing prime minister approval rating of negative 44, a day after returning to the legislature during PMQs. Truss ruled out reducing public spending to pay for the tax cuts, which further alarmed the markets. On 28th, Truss fired Cording and replaced him with Jeremy Hunt in an effort to placate them. Then, on Monday 31st, only 3 days after being appointed, Hunt issued a statement that essentially overturned the entire mini-budget. In addition, he cautioned that spending cuts would be necessary, which was in stark contrast to what Truss had indicated just a few days previously. Truss approval ratings decreased to negative 61%, which is around the same as Prince Andrew's negative 65%. However, this did calm the markets with her entire scheme in the trash and Hunt obviously in charge. Even worse, polling indicated that Starmer led Labour by 47 points in the race for Best Prime Minister, while Labour led by 36 points. As a result, Truss has lost 66 points, or around 17 points per week, since the Queen's mourning period ended a month ago. Additionally, she is no longer behind Labour by 10 points, which translates to around 230 seats in the upcoming general election. Compared to being 36 points behind Labour, which, according to the Electoral Caucus, would result in the Conservatives winning just 1 seat in a general election. In other words, she has lost about 55 seats every week, or 10 seats per workday. Even while this outcome is unlikely to actually occur, it is difficult to imagine things improving significantly for the Tories very soon, especially in light of the fact that they are ready to begin another cycle of austerity. Overall, her program was scrapped, her primary commitments were broken, and a new proxy prime minister was appointed. It's understandable why some might wonder why Truss is even still ranked 10th. Regardless, we live in a world that is getting more and more complicated, as Truss and Hunt are swiftly learning, when things, particularly economically, feel less stable. If you enjoyed the content, give us a like, and please subscribe to know more. See you at the next one.